again, that whole myth that technology solves your problems. I think that's still quite an illusion. I think there's still a lot of messy or ugly businesses, and definitely data architecture that's the magic wand of new technology won't fix.
So, Will, when you get into a business, what are the early signs that the problem is not just a vendor, but the client's internal operating model?
We talk about our payroll heroes, in organizations, those people that are or person that's responsible for payroll, that is that kind of bottleneck of knowledge, but we call them payroll heroes. And I think that's
Right.
actually, I think it's great to have a payroll hero, but I think that's also a red flag that there's risk in your payroll in that individual or those individuals. So I think actually, yeah, I think there's quite a few things to unpack there. There's the fact that it's over manual, the fact that it's time consuming, and the fact that you're
Mhm.
relying on key people to keep the
Mhm.
payroll lights on. I would say that's a sign you have actually outgrown your model.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our newly launched podcast series, Voice of NeeyamoPays UK. I am Sakshi Soni, your host and country head for the UK and Ireland at Neeyamo. Through NeeyamoPays UK, we bring together the global payroll expertise, UK regulatory knowledge, automation, and local payroll capability to help businesses run payroll with more confidence and proactive control. So, today we are discussing a topic that has become increasingly important for UK businesses, and that is getting the payroll transformation and vendor selection right. Because payroll, I see, is no longer a back office function. It now sits at an intersection of employee trust, data, compliance, technology, and ultimately business continuity. Specifically in UK market, leaders are dealing with fast changing environments, from the changes in national wage, statutory pays, and to the upcoming move of uh, mandatory real time payrolling of benefits in kind from April 2027. Uh, payroll is just becoming more complex and less forgiving to the poor systems, weak controls, and fragmented processes. And that is where I'm really excited and delighted to welcome Will Jackson, founder and the CEO of the Leppington Group, to today's conversation. With a strong voice in the payroll community on various themes around payroll, Will brings in 20 years of experience across HR, payroll transformation, operating model redesign, post merger integrations, and multi country payroll transformations and programs. What makes Will's perspective especially valuable to me that he has seen payroll from different angles, be it operations, technology, advisory, leadership, and ultimately independent consulting. TLG, Will's firm, is a UK headquartered independent payroll advisory, audit, and consulting firm, originally founded in 2011, and with its amazing philosophy centered around making payroll simpler, businesses better, and results clearer. So, Will, it's real pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Saxi, and what an introduction. That's really kind, and not much for me to say to that, but thank you for having me today.
Yeah, uh, absolutely. Will, around the topic that we have discussed, I think it's very important place to start with, since payroll transformation is often treated as a system change, wherein it always involves people, processes, governance, data, and trust. So, with this to begin with, I drop in my first question with you. That is, how is payroll landscape in UK changing, and what is driving more businesses to rethink their current model?
Yeah. Okay. So, great first question. How do I tackle that? So, We support both organizations with payroll and suppliers who provide technology and services. So we're quite lucky, and we're independent of both in that sense. So we're quite lucky to get a good sense of what is happening around the landscape. And that could be business as usual. It could be pre or mid transformation, and it could also be kind of post transformation as well. So I think what we're what we're definitely seeing in some of the work we're doing is that payroll is now becoming more strategic. And I think that's been a topic that we've been talking about for a long time, but we are seeing that change now. I think businesses are expecting better visibility, definitely faster reporting. And what we're seeing is this kind of stronger link with HR, finance, compliance, and especially risk as well now. We're seeing a lot of automation or AI. Real-time data is definitely raising that expectations as well. Whilst at the same time, I think there's a lot of change in regulation and workforce flexibility, and I think that's indirectly, or no, directly, that's making payroll a lot more complex, and it's already quite complex. Um,
Yeah.
and I think also what we're seeing is many businesses are rethinking their model now. There's such an advance in technology, legacy systems, and a lot of the manual processes. They're not really built for that kind of level of change to what we're seeing in the market.
Right, right, definitely. I mean, that is a very useful framing, I would say. So the pressure, I think, is not coming from one place. It is
No.
compliance, it is cost, it's employee expectations, it's operational fragility, I would say, all coming
Yeah.
together, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the technology that's available, I mean, and some of the things that people are adopting now are, yeah, it's putting a lot more pressure, I think, on that more traditional model.
Yeah, absolutely. This actually brings me to another question, building up with your experience. What are businesses in UK still getting wrong when they approach payroll
Hmm.
transformation?
Yeah, okay. Another great question. So what do businesses still get wrong? Um, I'll caveat the answer here is generally when businesses involve TLG, it's because they are getting things wrong or they just can't get things quite right. So big difference there with getting wrong and knowing and a lot of it's the unknown unknowns. We pick up a lot of that kind of advisory consulting work. I think businesses are still treating payroll transformation as technology projects, rather than operational and change management programs. So this isn't a new thing, but they are still getting that wrong. Um, I think there's an underestimation about the quality of their data. So that and the amount of internal work needed before implementation. So again, that whole myth that technology solves your problems, I think that's still quite an illusion. I think there's still a lot of messy or ugly businesses, and definitely data architecture that the magic wand of new technology won't fix. So that
Mhm.
rationalization almost. Um, there's often actually too much focus on replacing systems and therefore not enough on really improving the processes around it. And again, that comes with that feeling that, well, we're not changing our business to fit the technology. And I think it's not really about that. It's about, again, I think it's around the focus of what you're trying to do, and that actually it's more of a kind of a marriage of change, really. So again, I suppose that supports the second one, but that's I think they're the kind of main ones I would say we still see
Right.
businesses not quite getting right.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. In between, if I'm understanding right, Will, I think there is this point of not automating a broken process is very important, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, a new platform cannot compensate for unclear ownership or poor data quality, discipline, or weak internal governance.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, when you get into a business, what are the early signs that the problem is not just a vendor, but the client's internal operating model?
Yeah, and we do quite a lot of there seems to be this label of a phase 0, which a lot of customers who are, I would say, a lot more proactive in establishing that as is, before they even embark on transformation or even vendors or whatever. But what we're finding is, I think when we look at the kind of current state of a business, um, again, I think a lot of businesses are complex. And especially global businesses, larger businesses. And I think trying to manage the nuances of that, trying to keep to a standard operating model maybe, but and managing those nuances and exceptions around the business changes whilst the business continues to change. I would say that's probably one of the bigger challenges where organizations think, well, but that's just the way we are. And there should be a technology that fits that. So I think vendors find that quite frustrating because
Mhm.
it's not a magical, and no one offers a magical technology in that sense, and I think sometimes that's frustrating for vendors,
Mhm.
and whereas for organizations, I think sometimes they go into these relationships maybe not really understanding the current state
Mhm.
and really what that means to get to the future state. And I think
Mhm.
actually I always use analogies. It's a bit like moving house and
Mhm.
not being prepared to pack anything up and get rid
Right.
of some of the old stuff, and then expecting that move to be seamless and successful. I think you have to
Mhm.
do that. And I think that's probably, I would say, the typical frustration we see with vendors is that. And then I would say that the organization isn't ready for transformation in that kind of scenario.
Amazing analogy. And I think it's a very practical way to think about it. That's amazing, Will. This brings me, closer to the vendor selection process. So, before starting the process, what are the key internal questions you think leaders should ask themselves?
Yeah, and we do a lot of work in this area as well. And this is it's nice when we get in this early into the relationship. Sometimes we get in late when it's mid-project and it's already started and the pace is there and the relationships are starting to get kind of frictional. But actually, yeah, the best thing is more in that preparing phase. So I think the one question we always urge the business to ask is, what are you actually trying to do? What
Mhm.
problem are you trying to solve? Is this a cost problem? Is it a compliance problem? Is it a scalability problem? Is it an employee experience problem? Is it a bit of all of them? And it's often quite surprising when you ask different stakeholders that question. The answers are often very different. And you think, okay, well, there's an alignment thing there. um, I also like to ask the question, um, is what does good look like
Yes.
for your business in 12, 24 months, not just at go live, you know? So you can get lost, can't you, in that kind of transformation? But actually, what does good look like beyond that? And it's always nice to hear what the organization thinks the answer is to that. And then I think a lot of projects, a lot of organizations make the misconception around resourcing on their side. So they expect the vendors to do everything, whereas actually the misconception is, so the question would be is, do you have the internal resources, the governance, the leadership to make the change succeed? Um, and I think often the answer to that is yes, we think we do, but they still have their day jobs, followed by well, how experienced are they in doing something like this? And you can see where the answers sometimes aren't clear enough. And I think they're the three, I would say, internal questions.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's a very strong point, especially, the point on success after the go live. Because many organizations treat go live as the finish line, when
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually the
yeah.
beginning of a new operating model altogether. So yeah, I mean it definitely gives me a clear perspective, and it's a good thing to know. Moving to the
But
next.
again, if you go back to the moving house analogy, why are you moving house? You know, do you wanna move to a bigger house? You don't necessarily, do you want to move to a better area? But actually, you can have a bigger house in maybe not a better area. You know, do you need to have a smaller house? And I think again, it's asking those valid questions. Well, actually, is the current house okay, but it's just not refreshed enough? Can we
Right.
adapt the current house? Can we? And then it works in partnership with the vendors. So often the vendor relationships have gone quite quiet. So actually, customers who've been with a vendor for a while, they may not be as up to date with what the vendor's technology can now do, so they think actually we need to transform it, whereas actually that isn't the case. Sometimes it depends how close they are with the vendors to say, well, speak to your incumbent vendor and say, look, this is what we want to do. How can you get us there? Because the transformation isn't necessary, like moving house isn't necessarily easier or better than adapting the house you currently live in.
Absolutely. That's I think thank you for making it very simple to understand for anybody watching this episode, and it actually gives a very clear picture for a lot of leaders out there thinking of payroll transformation and moving from one vendor to the another. And this actually brings me to another question, Will. That is, what is the biggest mistake buyers tend to make when evaluating providers in the UK?
Oh, yeah, okay. And again, a process, if we're lucky enough to be involved in, is quite nice to be independent and witness this process.
Right.
But it's difficult then to guide and advise when it's a mistake. So the common one would be, I think organizations often compare software features without properly testing the service quality or the implementation capability and the long-term support. So it's kind of the magpie syndrome, as I call it. You know, it's something shiny, but actually it beyond the shininess and the newness, actually
Yeah.
properly testing those very significant areas within it is quite important. Um, I think the biggest one, and I think every vendor would agree, who's ever lost out a deal on price, is that the assumption that the cheapest option will be the easiest and safest. It won't. It just won't. And I think, when I've been supplying software, in previous positions, and we've lost a deal based on price, it's
Mhm.
not necessarily actually been the best for the customer. It's very hard for a vendor to say, "Look, I know we're more expensive, but it is worth the extra expense," because of course you're gonna say that. So I think there is the assumption that cheap is easier and safe, which actually isn't the case in real life. Again, another analogy. If you buy a cheaper car, it's not necessarily the best or safest option.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and I think the third one, I think a lot of organizations either don't know how to or don't pressure test how the provider handles complexity, exceptions and change relevant to their organization. So
Mhm.
real life kind of things that cause them pain now, really pressure test whether that new vendor can do it. Again, it's very easy to take that shiny new thing that solves
Right.
all your problems.
Mhm.
It's easy to engage with something in a pre-sale state and compare
Mhm.
it to your delivery state of what you've got
Mhm.
now. And I think unless you stress test that, pressure test that, then I think that would be, I would say, another mistake that's quite common.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to be impressed by front end, but the payroll success usually, is decided in the exceptions, controls, and service quality, I think.
Yeah, yeah, the
Right.
guts of the business. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to know that one question you wish every buyer asked during vendor evaluation, but most do not.
Yeah, question most. Hmm. I think, especially in the UK, there's in most cases there's a sort of politeness where I think maybe it's a cultural thing where the buyer doesn't necessarily want to be too intrusive to those kind of real life examples. I think there's a kind of politeness to it. Sometimes there isn't. Don't get me wrong. I mean, some organizations are very, very direct and they want to see demonstrable evidence. But I think some will accept the
Yes.
answer. And obviously in those it's a pre-sales environment. So what you're finding is the organizations are obviously getting the assurance from sales personnel, whereas actually what you want is the assurance from the delivery, the BAU personnel, the geeks, the nerds that deal with the complexities. Um,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think many leaders who are listening to this would relate to that. What do you think, Will, beyond the technology itself, what capabilities should business look for into a strong payroll partner?
but I think especially with international payroll, I know we're talking about UK payroll, but actually UK payroll is quite complex, even in its fragmented organizational architecture, if you like. So I would say or your payroll needs strong compliance expertise. So make sure that that's there. And especially around UK legislation, statutory changes, and especially data security. So I think that kind of risk and compliance area, that's the bit you really want the assurance that payroll partner's got. I think also proof. So, and when I say proof, I mean like proven implementation support, good project management. Remember, this is not a technology transformation, as I said. It's, it's operational and change. So you need good project management. And I think demonstrable evidence of the ability to work collaboratively with internal teams. So again, this becomes quite relationshipy when you think about it.
Right.
And I think you want a partner mindset. So a partner mindset for me meaning that they can advise, they can adapt, and they can scale with the business rather than just do it or process payroll. And I think that's it's that mindset. I think you want a partner, the word name partner rather than provider, I think is key there.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, if I'm understanding it right, I think strong implementation discipline, then comes
Yeah,
maturity, integration capability, and
yeah, I'd agree.
honesty, of course. Yeah, right. I mean, I really like that. The best partner is not necessarily the one who says yes to everything, but the one who is honest enough to protect the client from the avoidable risk. I believe.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And again, the difference with partner to provider,
Yes,
it's yeah,
it's
it's not a
definitely.
commodity. It's not a commodity, but you're buying, is it? It's not a kind of soda here, is it? It's you want the partnership. You need that advice. Your partner does this day in, day out. That is their core business. It isn't yours. And so you need to be able to trust and glean that experience from that partner because they have more of a holistic view of how this goes. And again, that's a trust and that's a relationship thing as well, which is why it's so key that all stakeholders involved, right down to into the business, there is that kind of relationship ladder, if you like, connecting the two.
Right, absolutely. When somebody thinks of moving from one vendor to another, uh, it's not just that moment when they decide to put that request out. It happens way before it. So, according to you, what are the clearest signs that a business has outgrown its current payroll provider or operating model?
Okay, yeah. Let me try and think about that. So, um, okay, I think the first one would have to be that payroll is clearly or has become clearly very manual, time consuming, or very dependent on a small number of individuals. So I talk about this a lot. We talk about our payroll heroes, in organizations, those people that are or person that's responsible for payroll that is that kind of bottleneck of knowledge, but we call them payroll heroes. And
Right.
I think it's great to have a payroll hero, but I think that's also a red flag that there's risk in your payroll in that individual or those individuals. So I think actually, yeah, I think there's quite a few things to unpack there. There's the fact that it's over manual, the fact that it's time consuming, and the fact that you're
Mhm,
relying on key people to keep the
mhm.
payroll lights on. I think I would say that's a sign you have actually outgrown your model. I think, but then you look at the operational part of that. So the error rate, the reworking, the employee queries. Remember, employee engagement is so vital around
Right.
payroll.
Mhm,
And also, I think if the business is struggling to keep up to speed with with growth or even the complexity,
mhm.
and I think when you look at the provider, if you're looking at the provider, the current provider or model can no longer support kind of um, changes in the business, like, I don't know, new locations or structures, payrolls, or even those reporting needs. I think
Yes.
that's a sign as well. I think that it's probably time to investigate change.
Right. This also brings me and reminds me to our first conversation wherein you stated one question stating how automated is very automated or how global is very global.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so now, yes, your answer becomes very relatable, and a payroll model, can appear stable because people are working extremely hard behind the scenes. But that does not always, mean the model is like sustainable for longer run. Absolutely, well, I agree with you. So, will once new partner has been selected, what does a successful payroll transition look like, and where do these projects most often lose momentum?
Yeah, okay. So, uh, quite a common again, just to caveat that, when we get involved, generally, it's because things aren't successful or isn't going successful. So, the things we see when we first get into a situation like that, we're the new people in the room, so we have to fact find, and the
Right,
first thing we'll look at is we'll look at the scope. So,
right,
what we appreciate in any form of payroll transition is there are multiple variables,
right,
within the vendor, within the organization, within the resources. And so what we try and get to is, and there's multiple opinions as well. That's the other thing we witness. So we try and get to the facts. So I'm a big believer in establishing the facts and consider the opinions, and
right.
then try and get to that point. So I would say a clear scope. It's quite surprising when we get involved in projects where the scope isn't very clear. So of course, instantly you've got your source scope is there's a misalignment. Then you can see why there's gray areas, if you like. Data, clean data, realistic timelines. People want to be live in very very short periods of time, and this is not
Right.
something that you want to rush unless you want to increase the risk.
Yes.
um, And the other one is ownership, actually. We see a gray area around ownership. So actually, I would say strong ownership from both sides.
Yes.
Um, the best projects we see, um, usually because we've been involved, it keeps a momentum through, I would say, the discipline of things like testing,
Right.
regular communication, and really visible executive sponsorship and ownership. So that's what we try and get in place.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say, and the reason why is I think a lot of transformation projects, once they lose momentum when decisions are delayed. They
Mhm.
definitely lose momentum when things like data issues surface or other issues surface late.
Mhm.
And also when stakeholders aren't really properly engaged. I would say all of those things don't help a successful transition. So I know I've answered it with what doesn't make a successful transition. So you just have to reverse the answers to what does make a successful transition.
Definitely. I think that's an important reminder. I think. I mean, payroll transformation is not just implementation management. I think, if I understand you well, it's a decision management, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as I mean, you have mentioned in one of your answers about BAU payroll teams. That brings me to another question: that would you recommend that organizations appoint a dedicated internal payroll transformation owner rather than leaving it entirely with BAU payroll teams?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a key consideration when you're budgeting for something like this. So you've got to assume that your BAU teams are fully occupied. with
Mhm.
the hours that they're contracted to work, right?
Right.
So not many people work in jobs where they've
Mhm.
not got much to do.
Right.
So so when you ask people to do something extra, then they've got to fit that in. And then when you ask somebody to do or people to do something extra, which they're not maybe very experienced with, they've not
Mhm.
only got to figure out how to do it, but then do it on top of the BAU. You can see why the layers there of risk to the success
Right.
become a factor. So I think, yeah, I would say, look, you've got to free up resources if you're
Mhm.
serious about doing this properly.
Mhm.
If you don't, then either you're not serious or you haven't really understood the magnitude of what you're about to do. So
Mhm.
yes, I would say is a key thing to budget and resource plan on the client side, resources that will devote themselves to this without causing risk to your BAU or your
Mhm.
project.
How critical are data readiness, system integration, and internal stakeholder alignment to the success of the transition?
Yeah, okay. So I think again, I'll bang the drum about data readiness because I think it's critical. Um,
Right.
it, there's a phrase that, and I'm trying to think of the phrase that doesn't require bad language, but it's bad in, bad out. You know
Right.
the phrase that yeah, yeah,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So for the purposes of this, I'm not gonna so I think poor quality data will slow things down and it
Mhm.
will create, I would say, quite avoidable errors. So again, this is about preparation, isn't it? I think this is about data readiness as I called it. But I think yes, definitely if you don't tidy that up in some way, then you've got to deal with it at some point. And I'd rather deal with it before you're in the middle of a project to in the middle of the project. I think system integration matters because payroll very rarely sits alone in technical architecture, right? And it is also a downstream processor of
Mhm.
other data, which is typically in other places, or
Right.
can be. So when you think about, payroll has to get data from HR, finance, time, third party, other systems. There's usually quite a lot of things funneling in, and so I think system integration and understanding that I think that matters a whole lot. And I've talked again before. Oh, sorry, I've talked before about stakeholder alignment. This is really important because there's a lot of stakeholders involved. Okay, so and when you look at the stakeholders, let's look at it
Mhm.
from the integration perspective: HR,
Mhm.
finance, IT, payroll, leadership.
Mhm.
And that's on kind of both sides of the fence as well, client, vendors.
Right.
So I think having that alignment, that communication is key there, because you need everybody on the same page, going in the in the same direction. So
Right.
yeah, I would say they would be I would say the three things I would say why it matters around data integration and alignment.
Absolutely. I think data integration, data readiness is foundational. And I think integration, of course, is equally important. But then I see stakeholder alignment as the third and final pillar to it. And I think
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
very strong way to put it well because payroll may be owned by one function, but it's
Mm.
affected by almost every function around.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for example, I'd use another analogy, like trying to organize a wedding is
Mhm.
quite a complex thing, right? Because there's a lot of moving parts, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of senior stakeholders involved,
Yes.
typically at weddings. And,
Yes.
if you want a successful wedding, it takes
Mhm.
quite meticulous organization and communication
Mhm.
around the successful wedding, isn't it? And I think when you look at it, compare those kind of two scenarios, everyone knows what a wedding's like. Not,
Right.
many people have been involved in organizing one or they've partaked in one. And I think that's instantly using an analogy like that. It's not the same for payroll in the sense that not everybody's been involved in a transformation or in those kinds of roles. So I think
Right.
that's why I use that analogy and it's no different to that, I think.
I mean, your analogies just make everything so simple for everybody to
they
understand the
so,
conversation going on. And anybody
some
who's,
are better than others.
huh?
Some are better than others.
I mean, anybody who is new to payroll would, be easily able to understand the things we are discussing here on this episode. Um,
Hopefully.
so looking ahead, Will, What should UK businesses be preparing for as payroll expectations and compliance demands continue to evolve?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I would say the big one that we're seeing now is more regulatory change,
Yes.
um, followed by greater scrutiny.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say there's definitely higher expectations for accuracy, uh, traceability, and compliance. I would say they seem to be really hot at the minute, and they're all interlinked. I would say. I think there's a lot more demand for flexibility, better
Mhm.
employee experiences, for example, faster access to pay,
Mhm.
and access to pay related information as well. That seems to be There seems to be a lot more demand, I would say, in that space.
Mhm.
I think there's definitely continued pressure to modernize payroll operations so that they're resilient, scalable, insight driven. We're definitely seeing the expectation, or we're definitely seeing that I would say faster evolution from legacy models that kind of
Mhm.
have worked for decades to actually very, very different modernized payroll operation models now. So we're seeing quite a lot of that on the operational level as well.
Right. Right. I think so. I think the direction is very clear. I think its payroll
Mm.
is becoming more real time, more transparent, and more
Yeah,
strategic. And as we
yeah.
discuss, it's becoming less forgiving to the poor data and weak controls.
Yeah, definitely less back office box into more strategic box. And I think when you look at actually what information and facts payroll gives you about your business,
Mhm.
it amazes me really that it isn't being used more strategically in businesses now because it is just facts.
So this brings me to the final part of this podcast, Will. For leaders listening to this conversation, what are the three most important things they should get right from the very beginning?
Okay. Um, and right at the beginning, we talked about understanding the why.
Yes.
So I would say my advice to leaders getting it right from the start would be clear on the business outcomes you want, not just the system you want to buy. So I think that ties in with my kind of original points, really, I think. And I don't think it'd be surprising to say, put the time in beforehand, make the data, the process, and the people foundations, make sure they're ready before an implementation begins. Don't rush into the implementation before that preparation. Pack the house up before you move. Otherwise, you'll be carrying bits and bobs out for weeks. Box it up, get it ready, get rid of all the stuff you don't need anymore, and then move. And I think crucially, you are going to need a partner. So I think choose a partner that can support the full journey, not just the deployment.
Right.
You know, think about the partner that's going to be with you long term, not just short term. And I think how you get under the bonnet of identifying that partner is no different to how you would assess any relationship you have with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Face value, you look at somebody's Instagram, you see the best of their life, right?
Absolutely.
If you want to really get to know someone, get to
Mhm.
know them and take the time to do that. There is no rush, you know?
Yes.
There shouldn't be a rush anyway. So I think just take the time to breathe and take that diligence that you need to do to select that best partner. And it might not be the cheapest. And
Yeah.
actually, on paper, it might not be the best on
Mhm.
paper, but actually, for what you want to do, it might be the best for you. And I think I would say the third thing I would say get right from the start.
Got it. I mean, absolutely. That's a very powerful summary. And I'm sure a lot of leaders watching that would definitely relate to that. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. What I'm taking away is that payroll transformation is not simply about replacing a system or changing a provider, it's about understanding the current state, preparing the business properly, selecting the right partner, and
Mm,
then building a payroll model that is accurate, compliant, scalable, and ultimately trusted. Thank you
yeah,
once
I'd agree.
again for sharing such a practical and candid insights. It was a pleasure having you with us. And to everyone watching this, thank you for joining us. If you are reviewing your payroll model or preparing for vendor selection journey, the message from today's conversation is clear. The right payroll transformation starts long before the request goes out. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you, Sakshi.